everybody, I am NicoD. So today I'm back with a new device and it is this, the Raspberry Pi 400. So this is a computer in a keyboard and Hey, wait a minute. That's not the Raspberry Pi 400, it's got a Windows key. Oh, this is the Raspberry Pi 400. So I've got about the same keyboard as a Raspberry Pi 400, but the keyboard is 5 years old. So this has been released for quite a while now, but I didn't buy it when it was new because I already had the Raspberry Pi 4 and they both have got about the same sock, but it isn't exactly the same sock. This has got a newer revision. And now the base clock of this is 1.8 GHz versus a base clock of 1.5 GHz on the Raspberry Pi 4. So why is this clocked higher? Well, this is cooled a lot better than any other Raspberry Pi. So even when it is overclocked to 2.1 GHz, it doesn't overheat. Maximum temperature that I've seen was 70 degrees Celsius. So that ain't that much. So it has got air holes to breathe. So that is one thing that I really like about this product. It is cooled very well. I didn't think it would be cooled that well, but that is great. Another thing I don't like about it is of course the keyboard. The keys are really bad. When you are typing on it, not every keystroke will be registered. So you have missing letters in your sentences. That ain't good. And also, what I really don't like is the cursor keys. So the up and down key are about the same size as a normal key. I really don't like that. I would have liked if they would have put $5 more into this to have such a keyboard with real keys. This types a lot better than this, and this is great for gaming too. So that is a negative. Another negative, a big negative, the biggest negative I can say about this is it still has got the undervoltage issues. So when you are using a normal PSU, one that delivers 5.1 volts, then you will see a thunderbolt on the right top of your display. And that thunderbolt means it is undervolting, and it also means it only clocks to 600 MHz instead of 1.8 GHz. So that is a real big problem. When you are using a Raspberry Pi certified power supply, then it delivers 5.3 volts to fix this. That ain't good. I want to be able to use normal PSUs. I want to be able to use power banks with this. And that is just not possible. So for that they get a big thumbs down. That is still a problem on the Raspberry Pi 4B. It is a problem on the Raspberry Pi 3B Plus, on the Raspberry Pi 3B, on the Raspberry Pi 2B. I just don't understand how they couldn't fix this. If they would have made the USB-C quick charge or PD, then the problems would have been fixed. No problems at all. I have never seen such an undervoltage problem on any other single board computers. I even have run my RK3399 down to 4 volts and it was still up. So that is really bad. Please, Raspberry Pi Foundation, do something about this. Make sure your next product doesn't undervolt. I can't say this enough. That is really bad electrical design. So I have tried different operating systems on this. Of course I have tried Raspberry Pi OS, ARMHF. I also have tried the Armbian nightly images. So Armbian now provides images, but they are not supported yet, but they are official from Armbian. And I also tried RPiOS, his branch from Armbian. And as last I also tried Manjaro KDE on it. And I was very pleasantly surprised about Manjaro KDE. KDE used to run very slow, certainly on a Raspberry Pi, and now it runs very fast, it runs really smooth, it looks great. So Manjaro KDE was a really nice desktop experience. So for who is this? I won't advise anybody who uses a computer more than 1 hour a day to buy this, but for people who use a computer just less than 1 hour a day, this can be very good. It is a very nice desktop experience, that I must give it. So in ARMHF you can watch video well. You can also use it to play games. So I will show you some benchmark results, I will show you the temperatures, I will show you the power consumption. So here we go! So let me first talk about the undervoltage problem. So here I am powering with my biggest power bank. This is a really great power bank. It gives 5 volts as output. It can give up to 3 amps per port. So it is really a great power bank. It works with all my other SBCs really great. And now it is undervolting, so this is the voltage of my USB ports, the output of the Raspberry Pi, and as you see it goes to 4.5 volts while the input is 5 volts. So you can see 5 volts goes in and the output is 4.5 volts, so that is a voltage drop of a half volt. That is really huge. It is now undervolting, but you don't see that there is a Thunderbolt in the right top of your screen. But if I do a 7-zip benchmark, then you will see what is happening. So the result of 7-zip is about 2000 for the decompression, while this needs to be about 7000 normally when it isn't undervolting. So that is a way to show if it is undervolting or not. As you see, there is no Thunderbolt on the right top. So another thing is the OS isn't in control, so there is something else in control that is called Threadix, and that is a small operating system that is in control of the hardware, and on top of that runs Linux. So that is something I really don't like, that's Threadix part of it. Why? Because it isn't open sourced and you don't know what is happening behind closed doors. Now let's try with my Raspberry Pi certified power supply. So this power supply, this delivers 5.3 volts. And when you have 5.3 volts at the input, then it isn't undervolting. So as you see, it gives 5.3 volts at the input, and now also the output is a lot better. So the voltage drop is only 0.2 volts instead of a half volt when you only give 5 volts as input. Even sometimes only 0.1 volts of drop. That is a huge difference. This does happen also with inferior USB cables. And as you see, now we have got 7331 as a result of the decompression. So this is an important thing when you use Raspberry Pi. Be sure to use a Raspberry Pi certified PSU to have the best experience. As you've seen, you don't always see when it is undervolting, while it does happen. And it is also a good thing to use a voltage meter to know what is happening. And now the specs. So let's start on the right with the picture on the top, or on the left with the picture on the bottom. So we first have got our gigabit Ethernet, then we have got one USB 2 port, then 2 USB 3 ports, then we have got our USB-C for power input, then there are the 2 dual micro HDMI ports, supports up to 4K, then the onboard micro SD card reader, then a 40-pin GPIO header, and there is also a power button. If you press function plus F10, then the power goes on or off. On the bottom you see the design of the PCB, and here we can see how they keep this sock so cool. So there is a big metal plate on top of the sock. That is more than enough to keep it cool. So here I am on the Raspberry Pi 400 and Manjaro KDE. So I've opened Firefox and Google, and now I want to download Raspberry Pi OS. So I type Raspberry Pi OS download. Then we go here. See all download options. Yes. And here we've got Raspberry Pi OS with desktop and with desktop and recommended software. I'm gonna download this. There are a few nice tools in it and a few nice games. And now I've got to wait until it is downloaded. So let me also install GNOME disk utility. So sudo pacman -big S and then GNOME -disk -utility. But you might have seen it, there is something wrong. I typed sud and not sudo, so I didn't notice that the O did register. That is something that happens a lot with this keyboard. So that is really too bad. They sell a computer in a keyboard, but the keyboard isn't good. That's really a shame. So first let's extract this image. And now open GNOME disks. So I type disk. And there it is, disks. And let me first do a benchmark of the SD card. So here I am using the SD card reader of the Raspberry Pi 400. And it is a SanDisk Ultra SD card, so it should perform well. But as you see, it's only about 40 megabytes per second. Now let's do the same test with my external USB 3 SD card reader. This is with a Samsung Evo card. These are not that good, but we still get about double of the performance of the SD card reader. So it is best to use an external USB 3 SD card reader instead of the onboard SD card reader. The performance is twice as good just for a $5 SD card reader. So now let me burn Raspberry Pi OS onto my SD card. And with some help of some video editing, we are now in Raspberry Pi OS. So here you see there are a lot of programming tools. That is very good. I like that. That's good for kids to learn programming. The whole Office suite is installed. So Chromium is installed, Close Mail. I installed KDE, but VLC is installed by default. Then the image viewer, then the games. I love the soccer game over here. I've played it many times. Let me play a game of soccer. It is a bit addictive and a bit too easy. I can just run through everybody and make my goal. And goal! And goal! Yeah, it's too easy. But if it were hard, I wouldn't play it. So now let's go to the end of the game. Fast forward. I won. So the score was 3-9. So I'm really good. So then video playback is very good over here, but only H.264 up to 1080p, and H.265 it can play 4K video.
You need these cables because by default the LEDs will be on.
Wow. So those are just data cables.
It's a USB.
Video card. So as I said, 4K in H.264 doesn't work, but at 1080p it does play perfect.
The ball is fired for the start of the second period. Madrid trailing by 1 goal, trying to go on offense to tie the score.
YouTube and Chromium also plays very well at 1080p. The plugin H.264ify is installed by default, and also uBlock. So for simple desktop tasks and media consumption this can be very good. LibreELEC will probably have better video playback. I haven't tried that. I did try KDE and KDE didn't work that well. VLC was better. So now let's go further and download Armbian for the Raspberry Pi 4. So for that I search Armbian Raspberry Pi in YouTube, but I will leave a link here in the description of this video. So in the description of that video you can already find the link to the nightly images of Armbian and also links to the RPiOS images. I must say that the Raspberry Pi 4 feels a bit slower than other SBCs. I love working on the RK3399 a lot more than Raspberry Pi 4, but if you never have had anything better, then the Raspberry Pi 4 will seem like a super PC. So here are the Armbian nightly images, and I downloaded the Armbian Jammy Edge Cinnamon desktop, and I first extracted when it was downloaded. So to extract it, I use XZ and then -- decompress and then the name of the file. And again I wrote that to an SD card with GNOME disks. So I first remove all the partitions, restore disk image, and I choose the correct image and I write it. So now let's go into Armbian. So here we are at the first boot of Armbian. Let me first explain what Armbian is. So Armbian has a build environment that can build images for different SBCs. So these images are Debian or Ubuntu based. Armbian is still new for the Raspberry Pi, but it does work well for server tasks. And the build environment is also very powerful if you want to build your own images with your own patches and kernel settings and drivers. So the first thing we need to do is choose a new root password. So I type 2 times my password. Then we need to choose which shell commands we will use. So I use bash. I've never used ZSH. I will have to try it one day. And then our name. So for me that's NicoD. And again a password. 2 times password. And my full name is NicoD. And now we are booting into our desktop. And the first thing I do is connect my Wi-Fi, of course. And as you could see in the top right corner, there was a message that there are no GPU drivers, and that is true. So this is the first official Armbian image. This is just a base to build on. So Armbian does need a Raspberry Pi board maintainer. So if we find somebody, then he can build further on what we've got. Or he can restart if he wants to. So again, if you want to become Raspberry Pi Armbian board maintainer, please do so. I will leave a link here in the description. So this image isn't functional for media playback or so. Sound does work, but there are no GPU drivers. Video playback will not be good, but it is great for server tasks. So first let me do sudo apt update and sudo apt upgrade so that we are up to date. And now I will show you a little very powerful tool that we've got that's called Armbian config. So all you need to do to go into Armbian config is type sudo armbian-config. So with this you can change a lot of settings. So there is system, network, personal and software. So first let's go to personal and change our time zone. I am in Belgium, Europe, Brussels. So locals I will leave like it is. My keyboard as a UK keyboard. Okay. Armbian is working on rewriting Armbian config. This costs a lot of money, so if you want to support Armbian, please do so. You can buy things in the Armbian swag store, or you can donate to Armbian, or if you don't have any money to spend, you can become a contributor. So help around at Armbian. Talk to people, that is already a very big help. So here in system you can freeze the kernel updates. If you have a system that may not fail, then that's a very important setting. That way upgrades will not mess with the kernel. Next you can switch to stable builds. I don't think that is working yet for the Raspberry Pi. You can set the CPU frequency and governor. Run apt updates and upgrades. Switch to ZSH. Disable the desktop. Then overlay root to enable virtual read-only root and DTC to adjust your device tree. One of the most important parts of Armbian config is the software part. So here we've got Softy, and in there are a lot of server applications that can be installed. So for example Samba, Cups, TV headends, Synctin, Hasio, OpenHub, Plex, ambi radar, sonar, tie-hole transmission, your backup, Docker. All these things can easily be installed with this. And then we also have got the Armbian monitor, then benchmarking SBC bench from Thomas Kaiser, then kernel headers. If you need to install drivers, then you will need that, and full to install all the firmware, RDP, enable remote desktop access for Windows, Thunderbird, GIMP and LibreOffice. So for that, Armbian is really good for server tasks. If you use a Debian Armbian image like Bullseye or Buster, then you can also use OMV on it. But otherwise, Armbian still has got a lot of development to do to have good desktop environment for the Raspberry Pi. So now let's go to the last operating system, so Manjaro KDE. So here we are at the first boot of Manjaro KDE. So this is also a 64-bit operating system just like Armbian versus the 32 bits of Raspberry Pi OS. So this is the welcome screen, I like it a lot. This is really good for new users, very easy to do the initial setup. So aim for Brussels, and I found it, it's so small and I still can aim for it. So UK keyboard, my username again NicoD with capital letters, and my password. Login automatically. Manjaro KDE is more based on desktop use, while Armbian is more based on server use. Armbian does have very good desktop images for other single board computers than the Raspberry Pi, but since Armbian images for Raspberry Pi are still new, things still have to evolve a lot. But Manjaro really has a foot forward in desktop tasks on the Raspberry Pi versus Armbian. So once all those settings are done, we have to reboot. And here we are again after reboot. And the first thing I do is of course connect my Wi-Fi. And I see I've connected my wrong Wi-Fi device. Oh well, I never saw it. So I really like the looks of Manjaro KDE, it is very customizable. I like the picture of the background a lot, it feels so calm. So first let's open Firefox and check if there is any GPU support. So about support, and then go down, and here we've got graphics. And if we look at WebGL1 driver renderer, then we see Broadcom V3D version 4.2. So that means the GPU drivers are enabled for Firefox. So now let's check helixinfo/b. But MesaUtils isn't installed, so I will install MesaUtils. So the biggest difference between Debian based Linux and Arch based Linux, what Manjaro is that Manjaro and Arch uses pacman as package handler instead of apt. So to install a package you do sudo pacman, then dash a big S and then the package name. It is a really small difference, but people make a big deal of it. So here as you see, Manjaro has got its GPU drivers enabled. I also can say that the Arpardini branch of Armbian also has got GPU drivers enabled. Now let's see how well YouTube video playback is here. So of course I go to NicoD. It is a bit slow to work with. When you want to pause it, it takes a few seconds before it goes into break. And RK3399 does this way faster. I bought some things. So I had this. So this is to hold a smartphone when it is clamped on. But of course it doesn't
So
work
sound
well.
works.
So when I clamp it on, I had this lying around over here somewhere. But when I clamp it on and I put my smartphone in it, then my smartphone goes down and it doesn't hang. But video playback isn't very good at 1080p. There are more dropped frames than there are played frames. So that isn't very good. But as we've seen earlier with Raspberry Pi OS, H.264i was installed. So let's install this plugin here on Firefox 2. But otherwise guys, it is a little bit bent like that, and goddamn, I keep pressing these buttons and it starts recording again. So that's not good. I'm trying to record also with this, and I'm pressing these buttons and it stops recording and it starts recording again. And now with this plugin installed, 1080p video plays a lot better. Of course, for the best video playback, Raspberry Pi OS is better, but this is a 64-bit operating system. It is a lot heavier than Raspberry Pi OS, but it is also a lot nicer to look at. If I have to have one piece of critique on KDE, then it is that you have to click your own name to open the config window. So that is really strange. I remember it used to be a dedicated button for that, but now you've got to click your own name and then it opens the system settings. And here you can change the appearance. So let me set it to light. I like the light appearance. So it does change the windows, but it doesn't change the taskbar. When you reboot, it will change the taskbar too. So here you can do all the settings that you need. So your display settings, everything you want. Audio settings, power management. So this is a very powerful configuration tool. I like this a lot in KDE. Something I really love about Manjaro is a terminal console they use. So it is called console with a K. So let me start a 7-zip benchmark over here. And I split the window, and here I will start edge top. And let me split another time. And here I can check my temperatures. So this is very cool. I like this a lot. People from Armbian, I want this in my desktop images. So that will be it about the operating systems. This video is already almost 30 minutes long and I still have to do the benchmarks and the temperatures and the power consumption. So I will do that very quickly. I've already spent 2 days on video editing only. So please support me because I've put so much time into making these videos. And then the temperatures. So this is a bit weird. So this changes with different kernels and different operating systems. So the idle temperature was about always the same, so 37 degrees Celsius. Maxed out with Raspberry Pi OS at 1.8 GHz it was 55 degrees Celsius, and at 2 GHz it was 61 degrees Celsius. This is with an overvoltage of 4. So this was stable with overvoltage of 4, while my Raspberry Pi 4 wasn't stable with overvoltage 6 at 2 GHz and Raspberry Pi OS. Then Armbian Jammy at 2 GHz overvoltage of 6, the highest temperature of 69 degrees Celsius, so I've never seen higher than this. Then Armbian Impish Cinnamon overvoltage of 6, 63 degrees Celsius for 2 GHz, so this is a lot lower than the Armbian Jammy image. The overvoltage is the same, but the kernels are different and also the version of Ubuntu is different. And it could be that the fact that one image has GPU drivers and the other not, that this makes a difference too. Then Armbian Impish Cinnamon at 2.1 GHz with an overvoltage of 6 went to 65 degrees Celsius, so that still isn't as high as Armbian Jammy with 2 GHz. Then Manjaro KDE at 1.8 GHz was 58 Celsius. And Manjaro KDE at 2 GHz overvoltage of 6, 65 degrees Celsius. So it is strange that there is so much difference. Manjaro runs really cool. Raspberry Pi OS runs coolest of them all. And Armbian for now runs a bit hot. So then the benchmarks. So you can't compare ARMHF with ARM64 images. So in 7-zip, for example, ARMHF will perform better. With Blender, ARMHF will perform worse. So for many heavy duty programs, ARMHF will perform bad. And for some it will perform better. You have to test your own software and see what is best for you. So overall there isn't that much to see in benchmarks. I did try to overclock the GPU with Armbian Impish, but that worsened the score of 7-zip, but it did improve the score from NicoD Blender. That is something strange, I don't know why that is happening. Also remarkable that the Raspberry Pi 400 performs about as good as the RK3399, but there are still huge differences between both boards. So now my conclusion, should you buy the Raspberry Pi 400? If you like these things, why not? But if you really want something very good, then it is better to buy an RK3399. They might not perform that much better, but they are so much better in desktop use, certainly when you are using an NVMe drive. Things open very quickly on an RK3399. With a Raspberry Pi it all feels a bit sluggish. This is also because I was using SD cards, but I was using very fast SD cards over the USB 3 SD reader. You could even use it headless, just plug it into your Ethernet. And it will be better than the Raspberry Pi 4, but in my opinion the RK3399 is better, and for the same price you can buy an RK3399. It has got way better I/O, it doesn't have undervoltage problems. I don't dislike this product, I like that it is cooled very well, but the keyboard could have been better. And of course the undervoltage problem is for me such a big problem. I can't power this with my power banks as I do with my other SBCs, so it makes it a bit useless for me. I will not take this with me on my trips, I'm nothing with it. I may sound very negative, I try to be as honest as possible, and this is my honest opinion. So I hope you all like my video, I've put so much work into this. Also thank you to my 2 Patreon members, they have paid for this for the last year. And also to my 3rd Patreon member that I've lost. But still thank you that you have helped me. I hope all is okay with you. So thank you all for watching. I hope you all like my video. See you all later. Bye.